Chapter 3 What Once Was Given. Days passed, and soon more than a week had gone by since Amethista had first left Amthera. Far away from the hidden cave, the world had continued moving without her, until one evening the pony returned home. The sun hung low behind the distant hills, casting long golden shadows across the quiet stables of Amthera. At first, Talion simply frowned in confusion as a familiar pony slowly wandered back through the gates alone. But then his eyes widened. No Amethista, no cart, no chaotic pile of bags tied crookedly to the sides. Just the pony. Talion froze. No! The world escaped before he even realized he had spoken. He hurried forward. Where is she? The pony shifted nervously beneath his touch. Talion looked behind the animal, then toward the road, then back again, as if Amethista might suddenly appear carrying an armful of crystals and some ridiculous explanation for all of this. But nothing. Only silence. His heartbeat quickened, too fast. Did she stop somewhere? The pony lowered his head. No answer. Of course not. A cold feeling spread through his chest. Amethista loved adventure. She got distracted. She got lost in ideas. But she would never send the pony home alone. Never. His hand tightened against the reins. No. This time the words sounded different. Not disbelief. Fear. Terrible fear. Talion slowly lifted his gaze toward the distant forest beyond the mountains. Something was wrong. Amethista was not coming home. Talion turned sharply and ran from the stables, past the glowing lanterns, past the evening markets, straight toward Rorke's forge. Rorke! The blacksmith looked up in surprise as Talion rushed inside, breathless. Rorke! Rorke immediately set down the piece he had been working on. Talion? What happened? The pony came back, Talion said quickly. Relief flashed across Rorke's face for the briefest moment. Then Talion swallowed. But Amethista didn't. The relief vanished instantly. For a second, Rorke simply stared at him. What do you mean she didn't? She wasn't with the pony. Maybe she stayed somewhere? Talion shook his head immediately. No, not Amethista. The words came out too fast, too sharp. She would never send her pony alone. Silence settled heavily between them. Rorke already knew Talion was right. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Without another word, he grabbed his coat from a nearby hook. We need to tell the queen. Talion nodded. Then both moved at once. Without another word, they rushed through the streets of Amthera, past the crystal gardens, past the glowing fountains in the town square, toward the towering moon spire rising high above the city. Silver light shimmered across its ancient arches as they climbed to the long steps leading toward the Elder Hall. Inside, glowing lanterns illuminated carved marble walls, while the Hall of Wings stretched endlessly beside them, lined with statues of fairies long since forgotten. Usually the sanctuary felt timeless, peaceful. Safe. But not tonight. Tonight, fear echoed through every hall as they hurried toward the crown sanctuary where Queen Epona resided. Inside the chamber, Queen Epona was occupied with preparations for the coming season. Not war, not politics, but the quiet balance that kept Amtera alive. Crystal tables were covered with glowing maps, harvest records, and carefully organized scrolls, while fairies moved gracefully through the chamber discussing their responsibilities. The northern blossom fields will bloom earlier this season. Queen Epona smiled softly. Then we should prepare the pollinators sooner than expected. Hmm. And the silver-winged flocks should migrate further east before winter. So send word to the keepers. I would rather move them early than risk the storms. The healing spring near the tower lower gardens need more moon water. Hmm. I'll see that they receive it. Every fairy carried part of the kingdom upon their shoulder. The flowers, the lantern crystals, the forest creatures, the harvests, and the rivers. Everything in Amtera survived because everyone carried a small piece of its harmony together. Near the side of the chamber, seated quietly beside a smaller table, stacked with ancient books, sat Melchior, one of the elders, the oldest fairy in all of Emeraldia, over 10,000 years old. Time itself seemed slower around him. While the others spoke and moved, Melchior simply listened, watching, always watching. Then suddenly the sanctuary doors opened. Rourke and Talion hurried inside, both breathless from the climb. And before either of them spoke a single word, Melchior already knew. Not the details, not yet, but something was wrong. He had lived too long not to recognize the feeling when it entered a room. Queen Epona looked up immediately. The chamber felt silent. Fear tightened suddenly inside her chest as she saw their faces. Rourke tried to steady his breathing. The pony returned, but Amethista didn't. Silence. A horrible, crushing silence. And somewhere deep inside Queen Epona's heart, something shattered. She rose from her seat immediately. Gather everyone, she said softly, though urgency trembled beneath her calm voice. The entire town. Within the hour, the fairies of Amtera had gathered around the town square. Whispers spread nervously through the crowd. Fear traveled quickly in a peaceful kingdom. Queen Epona stepped forward while the elders stood behind her. Beside them stood Melchior, silent and watchful. The pony returned this evening, Queen Epona announced gently. But Amethista did not return with it. A wave of shock passed through the square. Rosie froze where she stood. No, she whispered softly. That can be right. Beside her, another fairy looked around nervously. Maybe she's still traveling. Amethista would never send her pony home alone, Rosie replied immediately. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the moment she said them aloud, the reality became harder to ignore. Silence settled heavily across the crowd. Melchior slowly stepped forward. Despite his age, the entire square felt silent the moment he moved. "Does anyone know where Amethista intended to go?" Several fairies exchanged uncertain glances. One shook her head. "I saw her leave." "So did I." "But she never said where." Silence answered him. Amethista had told no one. She had left with excitement, ideas, and dreams, but no destination. For a moment, uncertainty settled heavily across the road, the crowd. Then Rourke spoke. "The only thing I know is that she borrowed my cart because she wanted to search for the largest amethyst cluster Emeraldia has ever seen." A few fairies exchanged glances. Even now, that sounded exactly like Amethista. Rosie lowered her eyes briefly. Of course she did. Despite everything, a faint, sad smile appeared for the briefest moment. Melchior's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Amethyst," he murmured quietly. His gaze lifted toward the distant mountains beyond Amtera. "If she searched for something that rare," he continued, "then she would have needed knowledge first. Maps, cave records, ancient crystal routes." Talion looked up immediately. "The Great Library!" Queen Epona turned toward him in surprise, then slowly nodded. "The Great Library." "Balder Keep," Melchior said. The realization moved quickly through the crowd. "She went there," Talion said. For the first time since the pony's return, hope stirred faintly inside him. If they knew where she had gone, then perhaps they could still find her. Queen Epona stepped forward once more. "We organize a search party at first light," she declared. "Tomorrow morning the silver wings will fly for Balder Keep." Several fairies looked up in surprise. The silver-winged birds were rarely used for long-distance travel, only when urgency truly mattered. "For tonight," Queen Epona continued gently, "everyone should return home and rest. We will need clear minds tomorrow." Slowly the crowd began to disperse. Fear still lingered heavily in the air. But eventually the town square grew quieter, until only a few figures remained beneath the glowing lantern light. Talion stood silently near the fountain. At first he turned towards the stables, then stopped. Something pulled at him, a thought he could not ignore. Without another word, he turned and walked through the quiet streets of Amtera toward a small cottage near the Crystal Gardens, Amethysta's home. The cottage stood dark and silent. Talion hesitated briefly before entering. The familiar chaos greeted him immediately. Scattered crystal shards, half-finished inventions, books stacked in impossible places, tiny sketches pinned crookedly against the walls. It still felt alive, as if she might suddenly burst through the door carrying another ridiculous idea. Talion swallowed hard. Slowly he moved deeper into the cottage, until he reached her bedroom, and there he stopped. For a moment, guilt tightened inside his chest. Should he really do this? But what if she had left clues behind? What if something inside could help them find her? His eyes slowly drifted toward the small diary resting on her bedside table. Talion hesitated for a moment, but then reached for it. At first, the pages were exactly what he expected: sketches, notes about crystal flowers, ideas, half written invention concepts. But then his eyes stopped on one particular page. Suddenly, everything inside him went still. The words were unmistakably hers: messy, more nervous, emotional, honest. She had written about him. I wish I could tell Talion how I feel, but every time he looks at me, my heart completely forgets how to function, which is honestly very rude of my heart. For the very first time since her disappearance, Talion smiled, only faintly, only for a moment. You always were ridiculous, he murmured. The smile lingered for barely a heartbeat. Then he kept reading, and the smile slowly faded. The handwriting looked different, less excited, quieter somehow. Sometimes I wonder if maybe I create beautiful things because I never truly feel beautiful myself. Everyone in Amtera seems to shine so naturally. Graceful wings, elegant smiles, and then there is me, too messy, too loud, too much. Talion's chest tightened painfully. No. The word escaped him before he realized it. Because none of it was true. Maybe that's why I keep making things. If I surround the world with enough beauty, maybe one day I will feel beautiful too. Talion's hand tightened slightly around the diary. He flipped another page. She had questioned, wondered about her parents. Why did everyone have mothers and fathers and she not? Questions nobody ever answered. She wrote about asking Melchior and Queen Epona about her parents years ago, and how both had gently avoided the conversation. After a while she stopped asking, but the silence had remained. And somewhere deep inside herself, Amethista had started believing that maybe there was a reason. Maybe she simply had not been enough. Not enough to stay for. Talion's hand trembled. He slowly lowered the diary. All this time he had only seen the chaos, the excitement, the inventions, the mess. He had never realized how much sadness lived quietly underneath it all. Something inside him finally broke, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a wall around his heart collapsing after holding for far too long. For the very first time, he stopped pushing his feelings away. To him, Amethista had always been impossible to ignore, bright, chaotic, alive. beautiful in ways the world around her simply failed to understand. And now she was gone before he ever told her that. Morning light slowly spread across Amtera. The town square had already begun to fill. By the time the Silverwings descended from the high crystal aviaries, several fairies looked up in surprise at the enormous silver-feathered creatures landing gracefully near the fountain. The Silverwing birds were rarely used for long-distance travel. Their bond with the fairies was ancient, and they only answered when urgency truly called for it. Silverwing keepers prepared the great birds while fairies hurried between supply packs and travel gear. Rosie stood quietly beside one of them, while Rourke secured travel supplies nearby. Melchior waited calmly near the fountain, his long beige golden robe moving softly in the morning wind. Queen Epona approached the group. "We are not wasting time," she said gently. "If answers exist in Polderkeep, then you must find them quickly." One by one the Silverwings lowered themselves before their riders. Rosie mounted first, then Rourke. Talion stepped towards his Silverwing, but stopped. Slowly he turned toward Queen Epona and Melchior. His expression had changed. Something heavier lived behind his eyes now. The diary words still echoed inside his mind. Why did everyone have mothers and fathers, and she did not? "For now," he said quietly, "we hurry to Balderkeep to search for her." Then his voice hardened slightly. "But when we return," his gaze moved from Queen Epona to Melchior, "the two of you are going to tell me what happened to Amethysta's parents." Silence settled instantly. Rosie looked up in surprise. Rourke frowned slightly. Queen Epona looked shocked. For a moment something like guilt flickered across her face before she composed herself once more. Slowly she nodded. Melchior simply studied Talion quietly. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Melchior inclined his head slightly, not dismissing the question, not avoiding it, acknowledging it. Talion held his gaze for another moment, then finally climbed onto the Silverwing. Moments later, the great birds launched into the sky. Powerful wings thundered through the air as Amtera disappeared beneath them, straight toward Balder Keep. And far below, hidden beneath stone, roots, and ancient earth, Amethista still slept within the glowing crystal cave, unseen, waiting. High above the mountains, the silver wings cut through the skies of Emeraldia with powerful, steady wings. Below them, forests stretched endlessly beneath drifting morning mist, while rivers shimmered like silver threads between the hills. But none of them truly admired the view, not today. Rosie sat quietly upon her Silverwing, her hands gripping the feathers tightly, as worry weighed heavily inside her chest. Beside her, Talion stared ahead without speaking. For a long while, neither of them said anything. Then Rosie finally spoke. "Do you think she's all right?" The question nearly vanished beneath the rushing wind. Talion didn't answer immediately. He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe it, but the image of the empty pony kept returning. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. Rosie lowered her eyes. Neither of them liked the answer, but somehow it felt better than pretending. Far ahead, the mountains continued to grow larger. Rourke guided his silver wing closer.
Remember when she tried to build wings for a squirrel?
Rosie blinked. Despite herself, she laughed softly. The squirrel hated it.
It bit me.
For the briefest moment, a faint smile touched Talian's face. Then it vanished again. The silence returned, but somehow it felt a little less heavy than before. Far ahead of them, Melchior's silver wings glided calmly through the clouds, ancient, silent, watching the horizon, as though his thoughts were fixed on something much farther away than Balder Keep itself. For a long while he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, a faint smile touched his face. One day, he said quietly, Amethista asked if my study needed more light. Rourke groaned immediately. Rosie blinked in surprise. Oh no! For the first time that morning, Melchior actually chuckled. A reasonable concern. It was not a reasonable concern, Rourke replied. Melchior ignored him. She decided to install a crystal lamp herself. Rosie already looked worried. What happened? She missed the wall bracket entirely. A brief pause followed. She put a hole through the stone. Rosie covered her mouth. Talion stared. Even he had not heard this story. What did she do? Rosie asked. Melchior's smile deepened ever so tightly. She filled the hole with amethyst and arranged them into a flower pattern. Rourke shook his head. Of course she did. Then she informed me that the design had been intentional from the beginning. For the first time since leaving Amtera, a small laugh escaped Rosie. Even Talion smiled, only for a moment. Then the silence returned. But it was warmer now. Far below, the forest drifted past beneath the clouds. Hours later, the mountains finally rose higher beneath them. Stone replaced forest. Ancient walls emerged from the cliffs themselves. And slowly, Boulder Keep appeared, carved directly into the mountain. The silver wings descended towards the enormous stone gates, while distant lantern crystals glowed warmly against the dark rock walls. A tall gatekeeper stepped forward as the group landed. His heavy stone armor echoed softly as he approached.
What business brings Fairy to Balder Keep in such haste?
Melchior stepped forward calmly. We are searching for a missing fairy, he said gently. A young one, purple hair, violet wings. She passed through here more than a week ago. The gatekeeper frowned thoughtfully, then slowly nodded.
Yes, I remember her.
The tension inside the group tightened instantly. Rosie stepped forward before she could stop herself. You do? The gatekeeper nodded.
She arrived in quite a hurry.
A faint smile touched his face.
Asked many questions.
Rourke sighed softly.
That sounds about right.
The gatekeeper chuckled.
Barely stood still long enough for proper directions.
Well,
For Amethista, that counts as standing still,
Rourke replied. A few small smiles appeared despite the worry hanging over them. The gatekeeper expression softened.
She seemed excited.
The smiles vanished again.
She headed towards the great library.
No one spoke for a heartbeat. Then Talion moved first. Then that's where we go. The doors of the great library opened once more. As always, Librian was already there. A feathered duster rested beneath one arm while he carefully dusted several ancient books near the archive shelves. For a moment he barely looked up, until he noticed who had entered. 4 fairies, tired, worried, and among them, Rosie. Librian's movements slowed slightly. Their eyes met once again, and for a moment the tension and exhaustion surrounding the group seemed to fade into the background. Something softly passed quietly between them, unspoken, unexpected. Then Rorke stepped forward.
We're looking for a young fairy who came here about a week ago,
He said firmly.
Purple hair, violet wings.
She was searching for amethyst crystal caves. Librian immediately recognized who they meant. A faint smile almost appeared. She moved through this library like a very determined hurricane. Rosie let out a small laugh despite the heaviness in the room. Even Talion's exhausted expression softened slightly. Librian carefully placed the books aside. At one point, she managed to rearrange 3 shelves while searching for a single book. Rorke closed his eyes.
Aye, that sounds like her.
I still have no idea how she did it. For the first time, a small smile appeared on Rosie's face. Librian's expression softened. She apologized afterwards. A brief pause followed. 3 times. Also sounds like her, Rosie said quietly. The smile faded from Librian's face. She searched for crystal cavern records, he explained. Ancient cave systems beyond the forest. His gaze drifted briefly toward the old archive tables. She was very excited. The room grew quieter again. She also attempted to carry one of the larger archive books. Rorke crossed his arms immediately. Oh no. Librian nodded once. It survived. I gave her a smaller version instead. Librian continued softly, pointing toward a nearby table. And she left very quickly after that. Melchior's eye narrowed slightly.
May I see the book she consulted?
He asked calmly, turning toward Librian. Without hesitation, Librian nodded and retrieved the smaller volume from the table. Melchior opened it carefully. His eyes moved across the pages in silence. Then he paused. Slowly he looked up.
If I remember correctly, the smaller versions do not contain all the information found in the ancient originals. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, Librian replied. Melchior exhaled softly.
Then I would like to see the original.
A brief silence followed. Librian hesitated only for a moment before walking deeper into the library. Moments later, He returned carrying a much larger book, heavy, ancient, its cover marked with faded crystal engravings, worn down by centuries of use. Melchior carefully placed the book onto the table and slowly opened it. The atmosphere in the room seemed to shift in the moment the old pages revealed themselves. Even the lantern light felt dimmer somehow. His eyes moved slowly across the text, then stopped. There it is, he murmured quietly. A location. Talion immediately stepped closer. Crystal caves, Melchior continued, deep within the ancient forest beyond Balder Keep. But beneath the description, another passage had been carved into the page in much older script. Melchior's expression darkened slightly as he read it aloud. Silence swept through the group. Rosie's smile disappeared immediately. Rourke folded his arms more lightly across his chest. Even Librian looked uneasy. The path is not stable. Once the forest is cut, it returns. Vines regrow as if the land itself refuses passage. No known traveler has ever successfully marked a permanent route. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Rosie broke the silence. That's impossible. Melchior slowly shook his head. Not impossible. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Ancient forests have always obeyed different rules. The room felt silent once more. Talion leaned forward immediately. Then she went there. Rourke clenched his jaw. Melchior gently closed the book. Yes, he replied softly. But the forest may already have erased her trail. When Librian looked at the devastated faces surrounded the table, a quiet heaviness settled inside his chest. Guilt. Not because he had done something wrong, but because he had not realized sooner. How could he have known? He did not know her intention. He did not know what she had truly been searching for. She had gone like a storm through still pages. But now, seeing the fear in their eyes, hearing the silence between their words, it became painfully clear. The fairy who had searched for the crystal caves had gone into those very forests and never returned. Librian lowered his gaze briefly. Something inside him shifted, a responsibility he had not expected to feel, or perhaps something else he did not yet fully understand. When he looked up again, his expression had changed, calmer now, certain. I will help you, he said quietly. I will go with you into the deep woods. A brief silence followed. Rosie blinked. You don't have to do that. Librian looked toward her. Yes, I do. You barely know her. Librian was silent for a moment. Then he glanced toward the old book still resting upon the table. No, but she came here looking for answers. His gaze lowered briefly, and I helped point her towards those forests. The room felt silent. I would like to help bring her home. For the briefest moment, his eyes drifted almost unconsciously toward Rosie, then back again. And no one yet knew whether his decision came from duty or from something far more personal? Without wasting another moment, Librion gathered what he needed: a few ancient maps, a small travel pack, and the knowledge they have just uncovered. He turned toward the group. "Follow me," he said simply. There was no hesitation. The search had already begun. Outside the great halls of Balder Keep, the sky opened wide above them. One by one the silver wings were called. The elegant glowing birds descended from their resting cliffs, wings shimmering like liquid moonlight as the fairies climbed onto their backs. Talion mounted first. Rosie followed closely behind, her gaze lingering for a brief moment on Librion before she finally looked away. Librion stepped toward the edge of the platform. A low, deep sound echoed through the stone terraces. From the lower cavern paths of Balder Keep, something massive began to move. Slow, steady, ancient. An ember maw emerged from the shadows. Its body was broad and solid, covered in natural rock-like plating and moss-covered stone ridges. Its breathing was calm and rhythmic, almost as if the mountain itself were alive beneath its skin. Rosie's eyes widened. "You travel on that?" A faint smile touched Librion's face. "Usually." "Usually?" Rorke stared at the enormous creature. The ember maw released a deep rumbling sound. Librion gently rested a hand against its side. "He's quite friendly." The creature opened its mouth slightly, revealing several rows of enormous stone-like teeth. Rorke immediately took a step back. "That is not helping." Rosie laughed softly. Librion looked genuinely confused. "I was being reassuring." The creature accepted him without resistance. He climbed onto its back. Above him, the silver wings shifted restlessly, preparing for flight. Then, with a sudden rush of wind, the sky filled with movement. The silver wings launched upward in perfect formation, cutting through the air like streaks of silver light. Below them, slower but unwavering, the ember maw followed, carrying Librion into the skies of Emeraldia. Together they left Balder Keep behind and flew toward the deeper forests beyond the mountain, where the land itself no longer promised safe passage. Through forests, across mountains, they searched everywhere they could reach. With Librion's knowledge, they tried to trace paths toward the crystal caves Amethista had once been searching for. But the forest did not allow it. Every time they attempted to carve a way through the dense branches and twisting vines, the land itself seemed to respond. Freshly cut paths vanished almost immediately beneath shifting roots and living greenery. Every time they attempted to carve a way through the dense branches and twisting vines, the land itself seemed to respond. Freshly cut paths vanished almost immediately beneath shifting roots and living greenery. Branches regrew. Stone trails disappeared, no matter how many routes they tried. The result was always the same. The forest refused to let them through, as if it was hiding something on purpose. At first, hope kept them moving. They searched from sunrise until darkness forced them to stop. One evening, after another failed attempt, Rosie sat quietly beside a small campfire while Librian studied one of the ancient maps. "We'll find her," Rosie said softly. Librian looked up. He wanted to believe that. "I hope you're right." Neither of them sounded convinced. They searched from sunrise until darkness forced them to stop, and every evening, exhausted and empty-handed, they returned once more to Amtera, to eat, to rest, and to prepare themselves to fail again the next morning. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. One afternoon, Talion slammed his fist against the trunk of a tree. "Ah, we were here yesterday!" No one answered, because he was right. The path they had cleared had vanished completely. Fresh vines already covered the route. Rourke lowered his axe.
This forest doesn't want us here.
For once, even Melchior had no answer. Slowly, exhaustion settled over the group like a quiet shadow. None of them wanted to acknowledge, even Talion had grown quieter. One evening, as they returned to Amtera once more, Rosie glanced toward the dark forest behind them. "Do you think she knows we're looking for her?" The question hung in the air. No one answered immediately. Then Melchior spoke. "If she's able to know," his gaze remained fixed on the trees, "then yes." For a brief moment that was enough. Even Talion had grown quieter. No one spoke much anymore during the journeys home. Even the Silverwings seemed tired now. And still, despite all their efforts, they never reached the crystal caves, never found a single trace of Amethista. Only silence remained beneath the living canopy of Emeraldia. One evening, after another hopeless day within the forest, the group returned to the city, later than usual. The atmosphere felt very heavy now, different. As Talion stepped down from his mount near the great stone terraces of Amtera, something inside him finally settled. Not peace, a decision. He turned sharply toward Melchior. "You and I?" he said quietly. "We are going to speak with Queen Epona tonight." Rosie looked up immediately from beside her Silverwing. Rourke paused while loosening one of the travel straps from his gear. Even Librian slowly lifted his eyes. No one needed to ask what he meant. They all remembered. The question Amethista had carried for years. The question Queen Epona and Melchior had never answered. Melchior looked at Talion for a long moment. Deep inside, the ancient elder already knew what the conversation would be about. Months earlier, before leaving Amtera, Talion had demanded the truth. But after that, he had said nothing more. Not while the search continued. Not while hope still remained. But now, after months of failure, the moment had finally come. Melchior gave a slow nod. "I thought this day would arrive," he said softly. His eyes slowly drifted towards the others standing nearby. Rosie, Rourke, Librian. For a brief moment silence settled between them. Then Talion looked toward them as well. At first he had wanted answers only for himself, but that no longer felt right. They had searched beside him, failed beside him, hoped beside him. "No," he said quietly. His gaze moved between Rosie, Rourke, and Librian. They should hear this too. Rosie looked up in surprise. Rourke remained silent, and Librian seemed taken aback. Melchior studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. As much as we wish to protect this truth, it no longer belongs only to us. Later that evening, the great halls of Moonspire stood quieter than usual. The search had worn heavily upon Amtera. Hope itself seemed exhausted. Inside the crown's sanctuary, Queen Epona listened silently as the group entered the chamber together. Talion, Rosie, Rourke, Librian, and Melchior. The moment Queen Epona saw their faces, she understood. Without a word, she slowly dismissed the other gathered inside. "Leave us," she said gently. The remaining fairies bowed respectfully before quietly disappearing from the sanctuary. Soon, only 6 figures remained beneath the glowing crystal lanterns. Silence filled the sanctuary. Then Melchior slowly turned toward the queen and gave a single quiet nod. And in that small gesture, both of them understood the same thing. The truth could not remain hidden any longer. At last the time had come to tell it. Queen Epona remained silent for a moment, then slowly she exhaled. A deep, weary breath that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "Sit down." The crystal lanterns flickered softly above them as the group slowly gathered around the great table. Rosie sat beside Librian. Neither of them spoke. Rourke remained standing for a moment longer near one of the crystal pillars, before finally folding his arms quietly across his chest. Even he looked uneasy now. Melchior slowly took his place beside the queen. Neither of them looked comfortable. Nobody spoke. And suddenly Talion understood something deeply unsettling. Whatever they were about to reveal, they had carried it for a very long time. Rosie glanced toward Queen Epona, then toward Melchior. The uneasiness in her chest only grew. Even Librian seemed unusually tense. Queen Epona slowly folded her hands together, and then she began. 311 years ago, the rulers, guardians, and ancient protectors of every kingdom in Emeraldia gathered together. Her voice remained calm, but beneath it something ancient stirred. King Dorgrim of Balder Keep, the Root Warden of Heartroot Grove, Pixie Queen Seluna of Whisper Bloom, King Alderon of Moss Hollow, Queen Terera of Azura Cove, alongside her brother, Prince Calum of the Merfolk Kingdoms, King Garibald of Silvermane Vale, and myself, Queen Epona of Amtera. As she spoke their names, the atmosphere inside the sanctuary seemed to grow heavier somehow. We came together because each kingdom possessed something ancient. A parchment, different from the others, yet somehow connected. Melchior lowered his eyes quietly. And when the parchments were finally brought together, they revealed the prophecy. Silence settled heavily across the chamber. Rosie instinctively pulled her hands closer together. Librian sat perfectly still beside her. Talion felt his heartbeat quicken. A prophecy? Something about that word immediately made the sanctuary feel colder. Queen Epona's expression darkened slightly. None of us understood it completely at first, she admitted quietly. But one thing became clear very quickly. The prophecy spoke of 5. Talion frowned slightly. Rorky's expression hardened. 1 child for each of the 5 great kingdoms, Queen Epona continued quietly. 1 born beneath the skies of Amtera, 1 beneath the stone of Balder Keep, 1 within the hidden roots of Moss Hollow, 1 among the glowing pixie groves of Whisper Bloom, and 1 beneath the tides of Azura Cove. Her voice softened slightly after speaking the final name. Each child would carry something different, something ancient, something connected to the kingdom of Emeraldia itself. The room suddenly felt far too small around them. The prophecy did not speak of ordinary children, Melchior said quietly. It spoke of children who would awaken alongside the world itself. A faint chill moved through the sanctuary. The Silvermane Vale and the forest spirits were not named among them, Queen Epona continued. At least not in the same way. Something about the hesitation in her voice made Rosie uneasy, as if there were still parts of the prophecy they had never fully understood. Or perhaps parts they had been afraid to understand. Queen Epona slowly lowered her eyes. Among those 5 children was Amethista. Rosie's breath caught softly in her throat. Librian slowly lowered his gaze. Queen Epona folded her hands together tightly. The day we gathered within Heartroot Grove, something happened that none of us expected. Even now, centuries later, the memories still seemed difficult for her to speak about. Her voice grew quieter. The moment the 5 parchments were brought together, the earth answered. Rorky frowned slightly. Melchior remained completely still beside her. It was not magic as we understood, Queen Epona continued. No spells, no rituals. It was as if Emeraldia itself awakened for a brief moment. The crystal lanterns flickered softly around them as her gaze drifted far away into memory. And before our eyes, 5 children appeared. Silence filled the sanctuary, 1 for each of the 5 kingdoms named within the prophecy. Children not born from ordinary families, but from Emeraldia itself. A chill moved through the room. Rosie slowly covered her mouth with one hand. Librian stared silently at the table. Even Rorky's arms tightened slightly across his chest. Queen Epona's voice softened again. We did not know what to do. But the prophecy was very clear. Each child was meant to live within the kingdom connected to them. So we brought them home. Amethista came to Amtera. The room fell silent once again. Then Melchior spoke. There was one final line written beneath the prophecy, a small footnote. Something about those words made the air itself feel heavier. We nearly overlooked it, Queen Epona closed her eyes briefly, then softly, almost like a whisper, she spoke the words aloud. And when the time comes, the earth shall claim them back. Silence. Cold. Endless silence. Rosy eyes immediately filled with tears. Rourke slowly looked away. His jaw tightened heavily as though the words had struck somewhere old inside him. Librion lowered his gaze in stunned silence. Talion stared at them both. His heartbeat thundered violently inside his chest. "What does that mean?" he asked quietly. Queen Epona slowly shook her head. "We do not know." There were no more pages, no explanation, no ending, only the prophecy. Silence filled the sanctuary, heavy, unmoving. Talion slowly lowered his eyes. For a moment he said nothing at all. Then finally he laughed once, a hollow, exhausted sound, not amusement, pain. "So that's it?" Queen Epona's expression tightened immediately. "Talion." But he slowly shook his head. "We searched for months. Every path closed. Every trail vanished. The forest never let us through because of this." His voice trembled now beneath the crushing weight of realization. Rosie quietly wiped her eyes. Librion remained frozen beside her, as though everything finally made terrible sense now. Talion swallowed hard. "This is exactly what happened." Melchior remained silent, and somehow that silence hurt even more. Talion's eyes slowly lifted toward them again, filled with grief, with anger, with heartbreak. "The earth claimed her back. It took her away from us." The words settled into the sanctuary like a wound finally spoken aloud. And for the first time since Amethista vanished, nobody tried to deny it. Silence lingered heavily within the chamber. No one seemed to know what to say anymore. Eventually, Queen Epona lowered her eyes. "You should all get some rest." Even her voice sounded tired now. One by one, the group slowly rose from the table. Rourke gave a quiet nod before silently leaving the sanctuary first. Melchior remained beside the queen. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. Talion left the chamber in silence. Rosie followed quietly beside him. And after only a brief hesitation, Librion followed too. Night had fully settled over Amtera. Street lanterns glowed softly along the empty road beneath the silver trees. None of them truly knew where they were walking, until eventually they reached the town square. The stone fountain stood exactly where it always had. Ancient, peaceful, surrounded by Amethysta's crystal flower mosaic. Rosie suddenly slowed. Then a tear slipped down her cheek, and she gasped softly. Talion frowned immediately. Something was wrong. At this hour, the moonlight should already have touched the crystals. The square should have been glowing by now, soft colors dancing through the night. But there was nothing. No shimmer. No warmth. No light. Only darkness. Talion stared silently at the darkened stones for a long moment. Then finally his voice broke into the silence. "The earth claimed her back, took her away from us." The words settled into the sanctuary like a wound finally spoken aloud. Rosie closed her eyes. For the first time since the search began, his voice broke into silence. The earth claimed her back. It took her away from us. Rosie closed her eyes. For the first time since the search began, she did not argue. She did not insist they would find her. She did not say they should keep hoping. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. She really is gone, Talion whispered.